Now on our agenda, I have the pleasure of welcoming and introducing Elizabeth May, Leader of the Green Party of Canada. Ms. May will make some opening remarks and then she will take questions from the floor. If you would like to ask a question of Ms. May, please line up behind the mics, and the mics are in the stands in the center aisle. Keep your question brief, as we've talked about earlier, and be sure to introduce yourself, as Ron Lemaire did when he introduced himself after he asked his question, and tell us the organization that you are representing. And with that, I welcome Elizabeth May.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here amongst you. And thank you to Mary.
To thank Mary Robinson. We have a few things in common besides being really good friends with the leader of the opposition of Prince Edward Island. But besides that, it's hard being a woman in leadership. And I am back in leadership of the Green Party of Canada, but I just want to say that Mary Robinson's 4 years at the helm of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, being the first woman president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, this being the week of International Women's Day, which is Wednesday. I'm sure you all know that. But I just want to say, good on you, Mary. Well done. And obviously, you won't be the last woman president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. I've gone through your resolutions. I should, before giving kind of I'm not going to give much of a political speech at all, actually. I just want to say I was so encouraged by your resolutions. There's areas of agreement that you might not even begin to imagine. The Green Party of Canada was the first political party to identify the issue that your resolution, I don't know which number it is, aquaculture development mandate. We spotted some time ago as Greens that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans actually does have a conflict of interest in its mandate. It's both responsible for promoting aquaculture and regulating aquaculture. What could go wrong? So we have promoted for some time that aquaculture as food production belonged under agriculture and agri-food, so you have an ally on that one. We'd like to see Department of Fisheries and Oceans concentrate on trying to protect our marine environment and the species within it. We also, of course, we are very concerned about the impact on your sector. I'm wearing, of course, my Ukrainian flag pin. I was just meeting with the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress just moments ago. The concern that you express is really critical, that agriculture sector got hit harder than most Canadians with sanctions against Russia because of the impact on the price of nitrogen fertilizer. So just to put on record, I'm completely with you on the justice of your being reimbursed. We need to stand up against Russian brutality. Canadians should share in the cost of standing up against Russian brutality. And on that notion that Canadians should share, let me also say, and this may surprise you, certainly it has surprised the Liberals, that we support Bill C-234 to make sure that there is no carbon pricing on farm fuels in any of the operations of farm fuels, including on grain drying. We think there should be a really strong focus in research on renewable energy and cheaper ways to get the grain dried. But back to one of the resolutions that really impressed me the most, your climate emergency and agriculture amendment. We know that one of the reasons the costs of drying grain went up, when we talk about the harvest from hell, I mean, yeah, harvest from hell can happen, but they happen a lot more in a climate crisis world. I was talking to one of my friends who's a prairie barley farmer, and I think this kind of, speaking of Ukraine and speaking of climate and inflation and a lot of things all at once, I asked him how last year's crop had gone, knowing that drought was severe. How did you do? I asked him, and he said, well, we decided to plant barley, thought that was a good choice, and then we were harvesting the barley, and because of the drought, because of this and that, all of our input prices went way up because the fertilizer prices went up, energy prices went up, but really we had a good year. Saying, how? How could that be a good year? You got drought, you got energy prices going up, you got fertilizer prices going up. He said, yeah, well, and doesn't this bring it all together? Because of the war in Ukraine, the price of barley shot up. So even though we were only able to harvest half of what we expected to harvest, we made more money than we were expecting to make. That's the kind of topsy-turvy world we're in, where Putin's attack on Ukraine drove energy prices up. Sanctions that we put in place to punish Putin unfairly, unfortunately, punish the agriculture sector. But at a time when we're dealing with the climate crisis as an emergency, I was very pleased to see that word in your resolution, we need to think about how we get through this together. And we can't let divisions or assumptions get in our way. The Green Party of Canada would like to be known as the party for Canadian agriculture. I think it's unlikely you think of us that way now. But the reason we think it's so critical is that we look at the climate emergency and see that you're in the crosshairs. It's horrific what's happened already to the global atmosphere. The impacts on humans, on our communities, Canada and around the world, are extreme and dangerous, and at this moment, the world's global average temperature has increased by about 1.1 degrees Celsius above what it was before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So when you hear people talking about the Paris Agreement says we've got to hold to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase, and as far below 2 degrees as possible, what we're talking about is extreme danger, and that it's going to get worse for sure. Because as we stand right now in a world that has a 1.1 degree global average temperature increase, we know that it's very unlikely we can hold to 1.5. As a matter of fact, I don't know a single scientist who thinks we now can, because from the moment when we committed to the Paris Agreement in 2015 to reduce greenhouse gases dramatically and quickly, they've increased. They've increased all around the world. Canada is the worst performer in the G7 in terms of greenhouse gas increases. And it's because we tend to have a Canadian attitude, and unfortunately it's the case as long as I've been working on the climate issue, which goes back to 1986, that we want to believe we can have our cake and eat it too. And so we can grow the fossil fuel sector and at the same time reduce emissions. And it turns out you can't. We actually have to make some hard choices. We have to have more renewable energy. We have to move quickly, because a 1.1 degree world doesn't feel very safe. 620 British Columbians, and how many of you are from British Columbia, you know this, 620 British Columbians died in 4 days last summer, according to the BC Coroner Service, because of climate change, because of the heat dome. 620 people died in 4 days. And then we had the atmospheric rivers. My husband has been a farmer, and he still has 10 acres in a little place called Ashcroft. Two of his neighbors, young couple, have been working for years on their 7-acre farm. And when we say they lost their farm in the atmospheric river, it wasn't just what people might think of in losing a farm. Of the 7-acre farm, 4 acres fell into the river. The land's gone. The river carved out a new course. The people in Lytton whose houses burnt to the ground have still not seen help in that same period of time of summer and fall, but that was July 1st of 2022 that Lytton, 2022, burnt to the ground. No, 2021, sorry. Summer of 2021, July 1st, 2021, Lytton burnt to the ground so fast that they couldn't get the new fire truck out of the fire station before it burnt up in the fire station. Now, I mentioned Lytton because some of the people there who've lost their homes are still paying the bank their mortgages, but they don't have a home. So there's been a lot of failure of various levels of government to respond to the climate crisis. In terms of agriculture, this is the kind of tangible stuff the Green Party would like to see. The agriculture community, farmers, are paying for ecological services out of their pockets instead of being reimbursed properly. So we know that there's about 1 billion additional tons of carbon globally that can be sequestered in soils. Farmers are the key operators to make that happen. You should be paid for every ounce of carbon you sequester in soil. You should be paid for ecological services and leaving hedgerows in place. All the old stuff that we learned about in the Dust Bowl in the dirty 30s, the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act and all of that that's gone by the board, that all made sense. And if you're in a drought, you want your hedgerows, but farmers shouldn't have to pay for keeping land out of production. Everybody should reimburse that cost because it's so essential that we have the hedgerows, that we preserve wetlands, that we sequester carbon. Farmers should be paid for producing ecological services, storing carbon, and of course for the transitions that are going to happen. Why aren't you paid for it? I don't know. Let me just look at the GDP. The GDP of what the agriculture community presents to Canada is more than the energy sector. I'm sure you all know that, right? 6.8% of the GDP in Canada is from agriculture. At the height of oil sands productions, it was less than 3%. All energy in Canada, and that's more than fossil fuels, that includes hydro, is at about 7%. So 6.8% of Canada's GDP is in agriculture. We're still paying the oil and gas sector to increase production. We're subsidizing oil and gas with what I called, as I said before, have your cake and eat it too strategies like carbon sequestration and storage, which doesn't work, but we're paying big oil. Why aren't we paying farmers? You're bigger in our GDP. You're all across Canada doing good work in your communities. And by the way, if we don't recognize that one thing the climate crisis threatens is food security, then we're not paying attention. And the prices on the grocery market shelves are just going to go up when California can't produce fruits and veggies for us anymore because of their droughts and water shortages. So the climate crisis is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, and I just wanted to put it out there. We'd love to be your partners. We'd love to make sure you're paid for what you do in climate action and that you're compensated for those costs that are brought about, whether it's tariffs against Russia, whether it's a promise that this government made that there would not be a carbon price on agriculture. That has to, and that's why we're voting for the private members bill, to make sure that it doesn't apply to the fossil fuels that are used to dry grain. It's only a matter of having policy coherence. We'd like to be partners with you. We won't agree on everything, but the stuff we do agree with is larger than the stuff we don't agree about. So with that, I'll stop in case there's any questions. It is a real honor. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. Et je suis disponible pour les...
You can also ask your questions in French. Sorry I didn't speak in French.
I never write out a speech ahead of time. So if there's any questions, you can shout them out or you can decide we got to move on with what we got to do. Yes, sir.
Got too much paraphernalia. Anyway, thank you for coming and speaking to us. I enjoyed some of the things, and you are right. We agree on a lot more things than we disagree on that end of it. So, but one of the things that we're kind of looking to it on the farm, and I talked to a couple of my neighbors on one issue type of thing, and we talked about, and you talked about the price increase of farm inputs and what's that happened and that. One of the things, though, that we do have in Canada that has been put forward by has been put forward by the government is a Clean Fuel Fund and the Clean Fuel Act and that end of it. But when it comes down to it, that's targeted to the commercial industry more than it is targeted to individual farms. And I would suggest there is a place for individual farms on biofuel that they can do themselves. We just need a little bit of help, I think, and that idea put forward that we can produce biofuel on our farms and the economic impact can be quite great. You know, I got some friends that are basically spending between $500,000 to $250,000 a year, depending on their size of the farm. That's their fuel bill. basically they were looking at and saying, if I can do biofuel and I can use my own feedstock for that thing, but I have to basically have no excise taxes, no provincial tax. If you can take the tax out of it, I'm willing to spend $100,000 or $200,000 to put up a facility that I can use on my own farm and do that. So that's an idea that hasn't been really pushed a lot.
By the way, sir, I didn't get your name or where you're from.
Lynn Jacobson, I'm Alberta Federation of Agriculture.
I'd love to try to pitch that before it's too late into the federal budget. So if you have any language around that, I'll take it to Chrystia Freeland. I still haven't gotten my meeting with her, but that just makes so much sense.
Thank you.
By the way, she has said she'll meet with me, so it's not a mythical concept I haven't yet gotten my meeting with Chrystia Freeland, nor have I, met any of my favorite patron saints. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Lauren Martin, Canadian Meat Council. So thank you for your comments today and really digging into the details for us. I know many of us in the audience resonate with some of the things that you're saying. We're a pragmatic bunch. So pragmatically, we wonder, or I wonder, what sort of things, initiatives you're doing to work across party lines to get some of the support across the table.
Well, I tell you, it's been a really interesting experience to work on Bill C-234 because the mover was a bit surprised when I said, well, we're going to vote for that too. We work across party lines a lot, and I have spoken to a number of my Conservative colleagues about my concern about nitrogen. I mean, there's been a bit of parliamentary debate that I think is unhelpful in conflating the Environment Canada more or less voluntary toothless program to reduce nitrogen fertilizers with the immediate increase in cost of nitrogen fertilizers because of the Russian sanctions. And I think we need to keep those separate, and we need to figure out across party lines what can work to improve a supply chain so it's 100% within Canada for nitrogen or for basically for fertilizer substitutes to commercial Russian fertilizers. How do we develop that here in Canada, and how can we make sure that it has less of a risk of, it's not just a carbon impact, it's a water quality impact. It's what we've seen happening in Lake Winnipeg with downstream runoffs. So it's a matter of sitting down and talking to each other without presumptions and without stereotyping. And basically, when you get a bunch of MPs talking together about something, it's amazing how often, if you were just listening in, you wouldn't know what party they were with, right? That's when Parliament's at its best. But if you have ideas that you want me to take around and try to talk other MPs into them, I've been in Parliament now since 2011, and I have only one Green Party colleague there with me who's also awesome, Mike Morris from Kitchener Centre. But we would never accomplish anything if we didn't work across party lines. We've had multiple pieces of legislation passed that were Green Party bills. We've had a lot of amendments passed, and we listen. So we really do we mean it when we say we want to work across party lines. Otherwise, I learned a lot from MPs that got elected when they were the first person in their party. I won't tell those stories, but it's just, you don't want to be lonely. You want to make a lot of friends, and you want to work together. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Peggy Brackfeld, President of Ontario Federation of Agriculture. One of the things I see in most party platforms is discussion about food security. And I think food security is important here in Canada and even globally. One article said that there are only 7 regions that actually export more food than it actually needs, or such. Canada is one of them. One of those regions. Earlier today, Tyler was talking about the importance of grasslands and the ranges that we farm on. Farmland as a whole is important to us too. PEI is losing their rate of loss, farmland loss is tripling. BC, one article said, I think it was catastrophic loss. And in Ontario, we're losing 319 acres a day to development of various kinds, including urban sprawl. And I guess the question is, are you working inside the Green Party or with your colleagues in discussions on how to continue to protect farmland? If we don't have farmland, we don't have a place to grow and grow food.
Yeah, Peggy, thank you. 100% yes. We have to preserve our farmland. We have to stop the development of the greenbelt within Ontario. We have to protect and preserve lands that grow food. And to your earlier point on prairie grasslands, grasslands are so significant in sequestering carbon, and people, they're sort of the unsung hero of ecological resources and soil sequestration. And they're also, grasslands have an incredible impact around, well, if you have grass-fed livestock, you're getting benefit on benefit on benefit. So yes, and we'll do anything we can to protect and preserve. And we work with our provincial colleagues. Obviously, the Green Party in British Columbia is also in the legislature, Green Party of Ontario. We work hard, clearly, to stand for protecting farmland and making sure it isn't gobbled up. I can't believe that in 2023, we still have a willingness to pave over farmland when we have lost so much already and cannot afford to lose more.
Oh no, you can't run me out, Mary. Go? Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andy Kivenhoven. I represent the ornamental the ornamental growers of Canada, growing flowers, food for the soul, and trees as a climate change solution. We appreciate your acknowledgement of the importance of agriculture to all Canadians. We believe Canada and its economic environment and social objective sustainability can be better served if all agricultural sectors are included. My sector grows products that will do more than just contribute to Canadian economy. They offer real solutions to mitigate climate change, sequester carbon, and my products also contribute to mental health. And don't we all need some of that? My question is, how would you propose that government recognize that all of agriculture is part of the solution of climate change today?
Thank you so much. And I think it goes with the Green Party mantra, which is always buy local, shop local. The horticultural products that come in from other countries carry with them deep ethical issues. When I'm buying flowers or any ornamental plant, I won't buy it unless it's grown in Canada, because if you're buying a rose that somebody's selling at the local grocery store, chances are it was grown in a greenhouse in Colombia where women aren't allowed to form unions, and where if they're pregnant, they still get sprayed with pesticides that can cause them birth defects. So yes, it's ornamental, and yes, it feeds the soul, but it's also really ethical and really important to buy Canadian flowers and Canadian ornamental products of all kinds. And yes, I got married and my husband brings flowers home and he knows which ones to buy. So I think that's a wrap, guys. Thank you and women. That was a generic, guys. So sorry. Keep on farming, keep on trucking, and don't let the bastards get you down. Thank you so much.